Well, greetings, brethren. Wonderful to see all of you. Good to see Mr. Dobson back. And, well, we have a big week ahead of us. It is Super Bowl weekend. Super Bowl Sunday is tomorrow. But then later in the week, we have the big VD infection. What? And by that, I mean Valentine's Day. And I'm aptly describing it as a venereal disease. Venereal having to do with Venus and the goddess of love. That's coming up this weekend. It is a big business for restaurants, hotels, sellers of greeting cards, flowers, decorations, candy, intimate apparel, and jewelry, and other gifts, even for pets. The National Retail Foundation expects that U.S. consumers this year are expected to spend nearly $26 billion on this holiday, averaging nearly $200 per consumer and over $300 for those in the 35 to 44 age group. I've noted before that in Revelation 17 through 18, Babylon is presented as a political system dominated by a false religious system, but it's also a commercial system, and false religion underlies a great deal of the commerce of this system, especially in terms of pagan holidays. Above all, of course, the holiday of Christmas, which puts many consumers in debt and retailers in the black. Whenever you go into a major store, you're almost guaranteed to be bombarded by the next one of these holidays on the calendar. For February, the big one is Valentines. But there's a couple of other occasions this month I want to call attention to as well. Last week, Thursday, February 2nd, we had Groundhog Day. Now, that's my daughter's birthday, but that's an unrelated thing. But Groundhog Day is not a big commercial day, but it's a curiosity in the news every year. It is a big deal in the places that do that, like up in Pennsylvania and some. This coming week, of course, again, Tuesday is February 14th, Valentine's Day. And the week after that is Tuesday, February 21st, Mardi Gras, or Fat Tuesday, which has become much more commercial around the country in recent years. I'm not going to focus on the commercial impact except to say that this is a big driver of many of these occasions. I mean, you just can't get away from it. The three February occasions I've listed are all festivities that originated in pagan worship and are likely related in what they represented. Yet for many people, they have lost or mostly lost their religious association. Because of that, some who reject Christmas and Easter and other religious holidays that come from paganism think it's okay to celebrate these occasions. And not just Groundhog Day, Valentine's Day, and Mardi Gras, but also New Year's and Halloween. All of these days sprang from pagan worship, even if they're not used for worship now. So what about these days? In the past, I've seen some church members going to New Year's Eve parties, joining in the fun. I've seen some go down to the Mardi Gras parade to catch and wear the beads. By the way, on New Year's, I will sometimes watch some of the fireworks and the music on TV, but I wouldn't attend a New Year's party or celebrate the occasion, as I know some do. Brethren, the Bible shows that we are not to worship God with pagan methods, which includes pagan holidays. I think we are agreed on that. But is it okay to celebrate holidays of pagan origin if there's no worship element to them now for us? And that's what I'm really asking today. So the title is Groundhogs, Valentines, and Mardi Gras. Harmless fun? Groundhogs, Valentines, and Mardi Gras. Harmless fun? Now first I want to briefly mention the background of these holidays in February. The first is Groundhog Day, which seems pretty harmless at first, but it comes from the pagan Celtic celebration of Imbolc in honor of the spring fertility goddess Brigid and the winter goddess Cailleach, the old hag, which are different forms of the mother goddess. This marked the halfway point between the winter solstice and the spring equinox. And it remains one of the Wiccans or the witches' 8 high Sabbats today, along with the solstices and equinoxes. With the lengthening of days, this day was looked on as the return of the light, and fires were lit to again encourage that. It was marked with weather divination. It was said that a bright day, indicated by shamanistic observance of badgers or other small animals poking out of holes to see their shadow, meant the winter goddess was deciding to abide in the world the 6 weeks or 40 days or so until the spring. The word Imbolc meant either in the belly for fertility or a washing or cleansing, symbolizing purification for spring rebirth. It's thought to be associated with the purification rituals of the Roman Februalia, from which we get February and Valentine's Day. This day of Imbolc, with its ritual lighting, February 2nd, was absorbed by the Catholic Church as Candlemas, claimed to be the day when the baby Jesus was presented at the temple 40 days from his birth, at Christmas. But that's not right. We know that. When German immigrants brought the observance to Pennsylvania, they swapped in the groundhog as the animal to use in weather divination. And I'll just note that this is still a worship day for witches and for many Catholics, Orthodox, Lutherans, Anglicans, and Methodists. Next is Valentine's Day. I mentioned the Februalia, named after the leather straps from a sacrifice meant to purify the people from the past year's sins. It was kind of their atonement in that sense. The straps were used to strike women to make them fertile. This is where we get the month name of February. It became part of the Lupercalia at mid-month in honor of Lupercus, a form of Faunus or Pan, the satyr, god of shepherds and fruitfulness. The festival also honored Rome's founders Romulus and Remus, who had been nursed by the she-wolf, or Lupa, in the cave at the base of the Palatine Hill that was known as the Lupercal, the cave there, which is where you get the god's name and the festival name. This was a time of drawing names for pairing off for immoral sexual union. And of course, this was related to the love god Cupid and his mother Venus. And there also seems to be a relation to the ancient hunter of wolves, traceable back to hunter Nimrod of Babylon in the Bible, perhaps the original Valentinus, or strong man, as the name means. Now, some claim St. Valentine was actually a later priest who performed secret marriages who was martyred. I think a good case can be made, as Mr. Barnett has before, that it commemorates, at least in part, the early Gnostic teacher Valentinus and his blasphemous concept of the bridal chamber and sacred sex. You can find his message about that online. This day is still a worship occasion for many Catholics, Anglicans, and Lutherans. And then there's Mardi Gras, or Fat Tuesday. The final day of gorging and partying before Ash Wednesday starts the 40 days of Lent until Easter, with partial fasting from some things, particularly meat. It comes at the end of a celebratory period called Carnival, supposedly meaning remove meat or farewell to meat. The day is also called Shrove Tuesday, which refers to having obtained absolution of sins through confession and penance, coming at the end to go into Lent shriven or absolved, that is purified. And of course, you could probably see a connection to this purification rites that we saw earlier. Now, Lent is a form of an Old English and Germanic word meaning spring season, and perhaps it comes from the same root as lengthening of the days. It approximates the period of purification following Imbolc and the Lupercalia to the spring equinox. Now, while we see 40-day fasts in the Bible, they are not in association with approaching the biblical spring festival season. On the other hand, we do find such lengthy fast periods preceding various pagan resurrection festivals. Festivals participants go into a bead lust to get these colored beads, engaging in inappropriate behavior to acquire more as part of drunken revelry and debauchery. There are many parallels with ancient pagan celebratory behavior. The day is still observed by many Catholics, Anglicans, Lutherans, and Methodists as including self-examination and repentance and prayerful commitment before the fasting starts. In some cases, repenting for reveling excesses earlier that day. I could say a lot more about all of these, but I'll just leave it at that. All of these observances originated in pagan worship. They are still considered worship days by some, but many observe them as fun time unrelated to religion. So is it okay if we participate? Let's do a quick run through of what the Bible has to say about all this. Look over at Exodus chapter 23. And I turn your attention here because this was given to the Israelites right away at the same, right after the Ten Commandments were given. In Exodus 23, as some of the laws God gave, it's interesting if you look here, because God gives in Leviticus 23 verse 12, 6 days you work and on the seventh day you rest. That's the Sabbath. So he gives the Sabbath. And then in verses 14 through 19, he talks about 3 times a year you're going to keep the unleavened bread, Pentecost, and Tabernacles. So you're going to keep these festival seasons of God's holy days. But then we see in verses 23 through 25, he says, my angel will go before you and bring you into this land of the Amorites and the Hittites and the Perizzites and the Canaanites and the Hivites and the Jebusites, and I will cut them off. You shall not bow down to their gods, nor serve them, nor do according to their works, but you shall utterly overthrow them and completely break down their sacred pillars. This is very interesting because this is the way they were to treat those worship practices of the Canaanites. So you shall serve the Lord your God, and he will bless your bread and water, and I will take sicknesses away from the midst of you. That's in verse 25. And then go down to verse 31 in the middle. It says, for I will deliver the inhabitants of the land into your hand, and you shall drive them out before you. Verse 32, you shall make no covenant with them, nor with their gods. They shall not dwell in your land, lest they make you sin against me. For if you serve their gods, it will surely be a snare to you. So you're not to, have anything to do with their gods and the practices of worshiping their gods. Look over at Leviticus 18. Leviticus 18. In Leviticus 18, we are told in verses 1 through 5, then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel. Say to them, I am the Lord your God. According to the doings of the land of Egypt where you dwelt, you shall not do. And according to the doings of the land of Canaan, where I'm bringing you, you shall not do. For you shall not walk in their ordinances. You shall observe my judgments and keep my ordinances to walk in them. I am the Lord your God. You shall keep my statutes and my judgments, which if a man does, he will live by them. I am the Lord. So this is important. You don't pick up these pagan practices. And we're specifically told, of course, if you look over at Deuteronomy 12, flip over to Deuteronomy 12, one place that we often go, Deuteronomy 12 tells us in verse, here at the end of the chapter, it says in verse 29, when the Lord your God cuts off from before you the nations which you go to possess, and you displace them and dwell in their land, take heed to yourself that you're not ensnared to follow them after they're destroyed from before you, that you don't inquire after their gods, saying, well, how did these nations serve their gods? I will do likewise. I'll be like them. I'll do it the way, I'll serve God, not that I'll be a pagan, I'll serve God the way that they serve their gods. You shall not worship the Lord your God in that way, for every abomination to the Lord which he hates they have done to their gods. They even burn their kids in the fire. So whatever I command you, be careful to observe it. You shall not add to it nor take away from it. Now sometimes we think, well, that's just, again, only if, that means we don't use these pagan days to worship. But what if they're not being used by us to worship? Well, at the beginning of the chapter, he said this in verse 1, these are the statutes and judgments which you should be careful to observe. Verse 2, you shall utterly destroy all the places where the nations which you shall dispossess serve their gods, on the high mountains and the hills and under every green tree. You shall destroy their altars, break their sacred pillars, burn their wooden images with fire. You shall cut down the carved images from their gods and destroy their names from that place. You shall not worship the Lord your God with such things, but you're not even supposed to have them at all. You just got to get rid of this garbage, is what he's saying. And then also, if you look back at Deuteronomy 7, look at verses 25 through 26. It says, you shall burn the carved images of their gods with fire. You shall not covet the silver or gold that's on them, nor take it for yourselves, lest you be snared by it, for it is an abomination to the Lord your God. Nor shall you bring an abomination into your house, lest you be doomed to destruction like it. You shall utterly detest it and utterly abhor it, for it is an accursed thing. It is horrific. Now, I'll have you look at one more place in the New Testament. And I'll make this point. We see in Deuteronomy 4, if you turn over to Galatians 4, in Deuteronomy 4, it actually says that Israel was supposed to be a model nation to the other nations, not the other way around. They weren't supposed to imitate those other nations. In Galatians 4 is where Paul is complaining to these Galatians, and he says, now these are people who were coming to church and apparently had divested themselves of the pagan gods, but he says in Galatians 4 and verses 8 through 11, but then indeed, when you did not know God, you served those things which by nature are not gods. But now, after you have known God, or rather are known by God, how is it that you turn again to the weak and beggarly elements, to which you desire again to be in bondage, these former pagan ways? He says, you observe days and months and seasons and years. I am afraid for you, lest I have labored for you in vain. He's not talking about God's festivals. He's talking about the pagan festivals they left behind. Now they're participating in the paganism, even though they know that that's not true. So it's not very, religious for them in that sense. Finally, turn over to 1 Peter 4. 1 Peter 4, and I want to note verses 1 through 4. This is what Peter said. Therefore, since Christ suffered for us in the flesh, arm yourselves also with the same mind, for he who has suffered in the flesh has ceased from sin, that he no longer should live the rest of his time in the flesh for the lusts of men, but for the will of God. For we have spent enough of our past lifetime in doing the will of the Gentiles, when we walked in lewdness, lust, drunkenness, revelries, drinking parties, and abominable idolatries. That's how it was. But he says in verse 4, in regard to these things, they think it strange that you do not run with them in the same flood of dissipation, speaking evil of you. Brethren, they should be able to see a difference. That we don't do that stuff. We don't do any of that stuff. So, the Bible is clear that God does not want us to worship Him with pagan methods, including pagan holidays. But also, God wants us to divest ourselves of things that originated in pagan worship, including such holidays. Now, if a practice was generally done and was simply adopted by the pagans, that doesn't mean we should get rid of that. But anything that actually began in pagan worship should be removed from our lives. The pagans ate meals. They didn't come up with that. We can eat meals too. But particular festive meals and celebrations the pagans invented to worship their gods, we are to have nothing to do with that. We can watch some things as outsiders, spectators, as we might tour ancient temple ruins, but we are not to participate in anything that emerged from pagan worship. We should not decorate our homes with pagan imagery. We should not attend Christmas or New Year's parties. If you're a baker or a florist, you should not make Valentines cupcakes or a Valentine floral arrangement. It may hurt your business, but that doesn't matter. You're not allowed to do that. We can watch the movie Groundhog Day, but we should not be part of the festivities. We can watch New Year's fireworks, but we should not be part of celebrating or even telling people Happy New Year or Happy Valentines as if that observance is a good thing. That's approving of others practicing sin, which Romans 1:32 tells us not to do. And 2 Timothy 5:22 says not to share in other people's sins. Keep yourselves pure. We need to extricate ourselves from it all. God hates it, and we should too. And let's remember that as we encounter these things throughout the year.